Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm bringing you my wrap up for all the books that I've read in August. So we're really coming back with a bit of a bang. I've read 11 books through the month of August. 3 of which I think are non-fiction, either 3 or 4, and then there's a few classics and a couple of romance in there. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a fantastic historical fiction that is set in the 1970s in Mexico, and it's very much a kind of crime noir vibe to it. It is about a girl who goes missing and 2 people who get embroiled in her sort of scandal and trying to track down what's happened. A neighbour who has been roped into it because she's just was taking care of her cat and now has to deal with it, and then a guy who is involved in the organised crime in Mexico and is hunting her down for reasons connected to the kind of criminal enterprise that he belongs to. I really like crime noir as a genre in general. I love Raymond Chandler, and this has that very classic crime noir kind of feel. It's all very underhanded and hunting down people, and everyone's like a dame or a doll, and it's just very, very fun. It's not my favourite Silvia Moreno-Garcia book out there. I've read quite a lot from her back catalogue. I don't think the plot was anywhere as strong in this one as some of her other books. So whilst the ambience, the atmosphere and the characters really worked for me, and I loved the setting of 70s Mexico, I just felt like the plot was a little bit flat, and I would have loved for our 2 main characters to interact more than they actually do. Their plot lines run quite sort of parallel to each other but don't cross over too much. I still think she's a phenomenal author and I love her writing style, so this was still a really great read, but in comparison to her back catalogue, this one isn't a particularly standout title for me. Probably my biggest disappointment of the entire month was Dolly by Susan Hill. I listened to this on audiobook and this is a ghost story. Susan Hill has fame for The Woman in Black, which is one of my all-time favourite horror books. I think it's fantastic. It is such a classic quintessential ghost story, and I love the dramatisation of the play as well. They're both wonderful. Dolly for me really felt like a pastiche rip-off of the exact same premise with none of the like actual plot to tie it together. It's about a cursed doll, maybe. It never really explains it. There's a whole creepiness. It does like a when they were kids and then when they were adults sort of thing with the characters. It's very short, it's very pointless, and yeah, genuinely massive disappointment for me, which is such a shame because The Woman in Black is so strong, and you really can just feel in Dolly that Susan Hill is just trying to riff off that same idea but with none of the actual thought behind it, and it felt very cash grabby. I was chatting with one of my friends who's read The Small Hand or The Small Child, who said a similar thing. So I think for me, Susan Hill is an author that I just need to draw a line under and not bother with, because I have also tried her crime series and found it distinctly underwhelming as well. So I think she's very much a one-hit wonder for me, and we're going to walk away from her. The next book I read is translated fiction, and this is Jiyoung, born 1982, by Nam-joo, and translated by Jamie Chang. This is South Korean fiction and is absolutely fantastic. It was a really fun read. It's quite short and it basically follows Kim, who it's about her lot in life, and we kind of see her as a child and going all the way through to motherhood, and it is using her as sort of the archetypal woman in South Korea and the sort of traditional values and the difficulties that sort of places on women and the boxes that it forces them into. Kind of very much a conversation about feminism, what it means to be a woman, and equality. It's the kind of book that was created quite a stir in South Korea when it came out. In comparison to some books I've read sort of from more of a westernized background, it's not as radical, but you have to then place it within the cultural context of the fact that it is from South Korea, where traditional values are a lot stronger. I loved the writing style. It had that wonderful kind of simplicity of sort of that I kind of recognise as a hallmark of translated fiction, especially things from Korea or Japan or sort of that side of the world. There's a real like quiet eloquence to a lot of the writing, so it was incredibly pleasant as a reading experience, as well as being very nuanced and interesting as a view of what it's like to be a woman in South Korea. So I would definitely recommend. Also, the cover is gorgeous on this one. The next book I read is the first non-fiction of the list, and that is Humble Pie by Matt Packer. This is fantastic. It is a look at numbers, mathematics, and the difficulty the human brain has with intuitively understanding them, and then the many mistakes that can lead to when we try to utilize maths in our day-to-day world. Each chapter is focused on a slightly different element, but it covers things like geometry, engineering, computing. It really sort of went on a nice wide range. For each chapter there were a few smaller examples of things where stuff can go wrong, and then it would take one big case study and look at it in a bit more detail. You don't need to have a strong background in mathematics to understand what's happening. He's not going into really crazy technical detail. A lot of it is couched in incredibly layman's terms. I'm not a strong mathematician. I don't read that much about maths. I don't do that much maths, and I totally enjoyed it and had a really great time. It covered things like the Wobbly Bridge in London, which is the Millennium Bridge where the bridge basically started swaying because of the fact that when people were walking across it, their footsteps created a certain resonance that also then created this wobble, and the fact that the engineers had, for years we've been considering the up and down motion of bridges based on movement, but they hadn't looked at the side to side motion. It also discusses things like the Y2K bug and how we kind of compute time and get computers to understand time, and the fallibility that is built into that based on sort of computing power that is available, but also a little bit of a laziness that comes from humanity of constantly being like, they'll fix that in the next generation. It's not like it's our problem today. And it just, yeah, it was a really glorious read. It's the kind of book that I was just finding excuses to sit down and kind of sit and blitz, and I think I read it in about 3 days. So really great fun, really accessible, such a fantastic look at mathematics and just how weird it is and how weird human beings as a species are, of how often we use tools like maths and science without fully understanding what it is that we are doing with them. So yeah, great fun. The next book I read is Red, White and Royal Blue by McQuiston. I didn't actually write down the author's name on my notes. Shoot, it's here. I'm like super late to the party with this one. This book was freaking huge about 2 or 3 years ago. It is a really fun contemporary romance between the President of the USA's son and the Prince of England. It is a wonderful gay romance. It's really lovely, and the reason why I read it is because it's recently been made into a frankly fantastic Amazon Prime movie. I'm such a sucker for like cutesy, heartwarming, lovely rom-coms. Like, I fucking love a cheesy rom-com. I am here for it. And this book as well was really enjoyable. I loved the character work. I loved the way that they interacted. I enjoyed some of the more nuanced plot points that happened in the book that the movie didn't have the room to explore. It was a little heavy-handed with the whole Democrats are the good guys, all Republicans are evil kind of conversation. I think politics is a lot more nuanced than that, and it is exactly that kind of black and white thinking that often leads to people not being able to come to the table and actually have conversations. And I think that's the case in British politics as much as it is in American politics. It also was a little bit too forgiving for the British monarchy. Frankly, I think that they're figureheads who are a complete waste of space. Don't come at me in the comments. But the actual romance itself was so much fun. The supporting characters were fantastic, and I had such a good time. Like, the whole time I was reading it, I had a grin on my face. So I definitely need to check out this author's back catalogue. I think they have one about time travel that is so clearly up my street, so that's gonna be my next one from them. The next book I read is a classic I've been meaning to get to for ages, and that is Burmese Days by George Orwell. I read a lot of George Orwell, but primarily his non-fiction, as well as his obvious big two, Animal Farm and 1984. This is the first one of his back catalogue of fiction that I've checked out, and I believe it is either his debut novel or one of his very early ones. It's a semi-autobiographical look at the British sort of occupation of Burma, and it follows a Burmese man who is kind of a corrupt official who is trying to take down a doctor and sort of the other people who end up in his path. There's also a romance going on between a woman who, relatively young woman who has come to Burma because she's sort of a little bit disgraced and is essentially trying to find a husband. It has the kind of hallmarks of classic Orwellian writing, of the fact that he has such a wonderful turn of phrase, but you can kind of tell in it that it's one of his earlier work and he really hasn't like honed his craft fully yet. But there are some real lovely points that do definitely make you smile. To warn you going into it, it is a product of its time. There are many characters in it who are incredibly racist. They are condemned in the book for their racism, but that doesn't change the fact that you then have to sit and read their sort of racial tirades. And their rants, and the N-word features incredibly heavily, especially at the beginning, which I was listening to on audiobook and that was really rather jarring. So just something to bear in mind, as with all classics, when you approach them, you have to think about the sort of time period context of them. Also, with that in mind, women are not particularly interesting in this book. It's very much a man's world, but I still like Orwell's writing style, and it was a really interesting look at a period of British history that I know woefully little about, presumably because we aren't taught it at school because we're ashamed of our past. So it was something that I really enjoyed, and I enjoyed getting back into Orwell's writing, and I definitely want to check out more of his fiction back catalogue because I do just think he's one of my favourite authors, and this is no exception to that. Another letdown from this month was The Great God Pan and Other Stories by Arthur Machen. This is from the Penguin English Library Paperbacks collection, and if it weren't for the fact that I'm trying to collect all of these, I probably wouldn't have bothered reading it. There are 4 short stories in this, The Great God Pan being the first one. I only actually read 2.5 of them. I liked the short story The Great God Pan. This is 19th century novel, I believe, and The Great God Pan is basically a sort of underground society who are trying to summon the evil god of Pan, who bears no recognition or connection with actual Pan from mythology. I think they've just taken a name and placed it on here, so please don't expect this to be an interesting conversation about Pan as a mythological character, which I wasn't particularly down with. That felt quite cheap to me. And then it's about the fact that anybody who sees him seems to be driven mad, and it's them trying to like uncover the secret of what's happened there. And then the next few stories felt like the exact same thing, like something mysterious is happening behind closed doors and a character is trying to find out what it is, and it just gets progressively creepier. My problem with a lot of books from this time period is the fact that they do a lot of telling rather than showing, and I think that really doesn't work for a horror story. So like I say, the first short story was like fine, and then we just rinsed and repeated it, and I was like, I don't really have the mental energy for this. But I can now add it to my English Library Penguin paperback, whatever they're called, collection bookshelf. So it's another one ticked off the list, and that's quite good. Another non-fiction that I read that I really enjoyed is Seeds, or sorry, The Triumph of Seeds, How Grains, Nuts, Kernels, Pulses and Pips Conquered the Plant Kingdom and Shaped Human History by Thor Hanson. This again has been sort of quite popular on non-fiction booktube. Thor Hanson has quite a large back catalogue that a lot of people have read. I know a Book Olive is a big fan of his writing. I loved this book. It was such a perfect combination for me of a little bit of social history, a little bit of biology, a little bit of paleontology. We sort of bounced across different eras. We looked at the different ways that seeds and humans have interacted, and each chapter just had a slightly different focus, which is basically all I ever want from a non-fiction book. I really enjoyed the paleontology side of things, where it talked about seeds appearing in the Carboniferous period and sort of the way that they evolved and how that changed sort of plant interactions and how they then became the dominant way that plants procreated. I really enjoyed as well looking at it from the agricultural revolution perspective and how it impacted how human beings were able to get more food, energy from their food, and also to be able to store and cultivate food a bit more. And then I also enjoyed some of the ways that we've seeds have interacted with animals to get what they want. There was a chapter on coffee, which was fantastic and really interesting to look at how coffee has become such a universal staple of society as a whole, and how caffeine has been interwoven into that. Just generally, it's hard to pinpoint a favourite point. This was just a fantastic book. I listened to it on audiobook, and I found myself finding things to do to keep listening to the audiobook because I was having such an enjoyable time with the narrator as well. You know, just finding more housework to do purely so that you can keep the audiobook on, which for me really is just such a landmark point of an audiobook being fantastic. So yeah, would 100% recommend this. Fantastic. We'll definitely check out more of Thor's work. Another non-fiction that I totally forgot to mention earlier, but I did finish early on in the month, is Rebel Cell by Kate Arney. This is Cancer, Evolution and the Science of Life. This is sort of one of the final pop science books on my pop science epic journey I've been doing over the past 18 months with my course. I really enjoyed this book, and I think if you are looking for a book on cancer, this is probably a better choice than the particularly popular one, Emperor of Maladies, because it's shorter and I think more accessible. This looks at cancer from an evolutionary perspective and looks at it as an inevitable feature of the process of evolution, and how if cells are going to constantly keep evolving and changing, cancer's kind of going to happen. It looks at some of the earlier origins of cancer, how we have examples of it in the fossil record. We have evidence of dinosaurs with cancer, many different human subspecies with cancer, and sort of the way that it's found in the animal kingdom, and how you get correlations between healing speed and cancer, but then you get weird things like sharks have very good healing but have incredibly low rates of cancer. No one's really too sure why. It then moves on to look at more modern day treatments of them and has conversations about chemotherapy, how we should be approaching the treatment of cancer. Should we be doing like a scorched earth idea, or should we be just trying to sort of manage it gently? How you can end up with resistances forming, just like you can with antibiotics and microbial resistance, and how you can get resistance kind of everywhere, because again, that's like the landmark of evolution, and just sort of cancer in a wider cultural picture of how life itself constantly progresses. I hope I haven't like hyped that up too much, but genuinely this was such a good book and such a really interesting look at how we interact with it from a medical perspective. The only thing I'd say is it didn't go into much detail about different types of cancer within humans and the different ones that there can be. That's not what this book is trying to do. So if you are looking for almost like a catalogue of cancers, this is not it. And I do definitely need to go do more reading on oncology just to kind of get my cancer knowledge a bit more solid for work, if nothing else. But yeah, really great read. Arney is such a fantastic writer, and you can really feel her enthusiasm through this book. The front describes it as a lively study, and I really do think that that's an apt word for it. Her writing just has this sort of youthful quality, this sort of bounciness to it that makes the fact that it's quite a like serious and severe topic feel less intense, because you are kind of taken along for the ride with her writing style. The next book that I finished is The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. This is a historical fiction set in a combination of First World War and then just after the Second World War, which is very much like a landmark of Kate Quinn's writing. She quite often does dual timelines running alongside each other. I love Kate Quinn. She is fast becoming a new favourite author. I read her book The Huntress a while ago and also really loved it. This one is looking at the spy networks that were set up by women in the First World War and is based on a lot of true characters, which again is a sort of landmark of Kate Quinn's writing, as she does a lot of work to make them very historically accurate, which I greatly appreciate as a massive fan of history. So we follow Evie, who is becoming a spy and is working in German occupied France, trying to get information to then be able to give to the British side to be able to try and help end the war. And then we also have a modern day, oh sorry, not modern day, but like later on timeline happening in the like late 40s, just after the Second World War, of a young woman who has found herself pregnant and supposed to be getting rid of it, but she's actually trying to track down her cousin who Evie has interacted with in the past, and so their kind of timelines cross and Evie helps her going forward. I really love this style of writing with historical fiction, especially when both timelines are still set within history, so you still feel like you're enjoying historical fiction the whole time. You're not sat in a modern setting at any point, but you get that like dual element of what's happening. And it was also really enjoyable seeing Evie as a young novice, very excited to do her part for her country, spy, and then to also see her in the like later time period where she's very wizened, life has clearly been incredibly cruel to her, and you watch her slow descent into becoming this jaded person, which you know she's going to be. And it just made all of the points in the earlier timeline so much more poignant and kind of bittersweet, because you knew that it was going to end badly. So anytime things were going right for her, you just knew what the ending was going to be, and it was sort of almost like watching a slow-mo car crash, but in a positive way. Yeah, so like I say, Kate Quinn, fantastic. I definitely would check out more of her stuff, and The Huntress was also a really great read, so she is a firm favourite for me from historical fiction. And then the final book that I literally just finished this morning, which was perfect timing for the wrap-up, is Firelight by Kristen Callihan. This is the first book in her Darkest London series, and this is a combination of paranormal romance and historical romance. It's set in the Victorian era, and our main character has the ability to control fire. She is an elemental witch of sorts, but we don't really find out much about the magic system, and she is been forced into an arranged marriage with a fairly scary looking guy from the ton who wears a mask at all times, and we're not sure for a very long period of time exactly why. He then spends a lot of the book being framed for a variety of murders, and it's up to him and her to try and find out what's going on, to look into his shady past. Lots of secrets get revealed, and it's about them coming together and finding a way to love each other despite the fact that they both have these things that are kind of getting in the way. Kristen Callihan is a fantastic romance writer. I really enjoyed this book and I think the world building is incredibly interesting. I've actually already read book 2 because these are the kind of books you can read out of sequence, which is called Moonlight. So I kind of knew what I was getting into going in, and I kind of knew some of the elements of the first book because book 2 does reference a few of the events, but I still really enjoyed it and I love her writing style, and I think she's definitely a romance author that I'm going to need to check out because she has an insanely large back catalogue, and these books are actually from I think like the early 2000s, so this series alone I think has about 8 books in it. But yeah, so slam dunk read really. If you're wondering about kind of smut level, it's not a fade to black, but it's fairly chill, doesn't get particularly graphic at any point, and it really doesn't feature particularly heavy as part of the storyline. It's very much more of a plot driven romance. So that was it, that's the wrap up. My throat feels really dry now. That was quite a few books. Tell me what you think down below. Are any of these gonna end up on your TBR? Do you disagree with any of my thoughts for them? I can already tell you now September's gonna be a massive wrap up as well. I'm already quite far through 3 different books at the moment. So very excited. And for those of you who are missing my dino chat, I do have a dinosaur book that I will definitely be finishing in time for the September wrap up. So that's it from me. Have a wonderful reading week and I will chat to you soon. Bye.